It's hitting a signal there. Yeah? Oh, okay. I don't know. All he did was turn it away and back. Thanks, Brandon. You have to stay in the corner over there now. He's like the guy in Real Genius, the mad scientist that lives in the closet. How was this for volume, hon? Good? Okay. Sorry about that. We have moved locations, if you weren't able to tell. And we are in the library today. Did everyone leave, or we still have? We still have. Okay. Hey, hello, everyone. First Thursday of every month. So we're here. I usually say this at the end, but I'll say it at the front. If you haven't been here before, the reason that we do these is that one of the things that I really enjoyed is that when we had openings at the gallery, at the end of the night, people would wind up hanging out and get to talk about great art things. And also being in the physical setting is something that we kind of miss. We've closed the gallery locations to shift to publishing because books for us are the way to make our exhibitions permanent. And the Mucha Le Pater book was kind of the real first testament to that. I'd envisioned the best museum exhibition that I'd ever been to, which actually, let's see, I just thought of that now. Let's see if which funnily enough was this exhibition. And it was, I'm not going to try to put that in. It was far and away the coolest exhibition that I'd ever been to. They talked about Paris in the 19th century, but instead of just having Lautrec's artworks up, they had, is everything okay? Okay. They had pamphlets from the music halls and menus and photographs, and they had a big mural that was from Le Chat Noir up on the wall. And it was all so dimly lit that I felt like I was walking through, in some ways, a very clean version of the alleyways of like a dreamlike Montmartre at the time of Lautrec. And I never forgot that experience. And so when I made the Le Pater book, the reason that there's so much information surrounding it is because of that exhibition and the experience that I had with it. And the idea that it's not enough to look at an artwork, but to understand the time period and the things that surrounded it, it's infinitely more immersive. And I noticed that a lot with music. If I'm talking to someone about a band and I'm able to say, like I played Cat, Emerson, Lake and Palmer for the first time, and she had not heard their music before. And I showed her the H.R. Giger album cover and she freaked out. And she was commenting on how Brian Eno-ish some of the sounds were. And I was saying this was concurrent with the Eno Roxy music era. And when you understand the year in which something was made and that music like that didn't exist a couple years prior, it just helps contextualize it. And I've always felt that way with art, that if you look at a painting, of course, there's artworks that just speak for themselves and are beautiful. But the more you know about the day in which they were created, I've just found it to be always a very enriching experience. And if you are here, you probably like the kinds of books that we put out, which means you probably feel the same way. So what we did tonight is I picked 5 books. 5 books that for me are necessary for everyone's library. So if you love what we do, if you loved the gallery when it was open, if you love our books, if you love Art Nouveau and Symbolism and all of that, these are 5 books that I think you should have. There are some, like Dreamers of Decadence, but I talked about that last month. So this is visual books, not text-oriented books. And the first one is kind of the Bible. It's very, very, very affordable. You should be able to find this for $5 or $10 anywhere used. There have been multiple covers, but the book is simply called Symbolism by Michael Gibson, and it's published by Taschen. The thing that Taschen does extraordinarily well is they make really good, affordable art books. Now that I've become a little bit of a book snob, there are things about their printing that there are paintings that are perhaps better represented in other volumes. But the combination of just vast amounts of information coupled with lots and lots of historical information, how do I phrase this? You have the depth and breadth of literally 85% of what you'd want to know about symbolist art, with text that contextualizes the artworks, so that some of these things that just seem, I don't know, I mean, of course we love Gustave Moreau, but maybe you wouldn't be looking at George Frederick Watts, or, of course you've got the paintings like the Ophelia painting, which I think is the cover of one of the editions of this. And then you've got all of the crazy Edvard Munch material. And so for me, when I first came into this, I was attracted probably most of all to things like the Ophelia painting and things that were a little more Victorian romantic. But it was through this book that I discovered artists like Franz von Stuck. And the other thing that I learned in a very major way from this book, I think there were two things that I would say. Actually, I'm going to say three. The third is that you have, and I'm trying to find an example, you had countries like Poland and Italy, where some of the artists that were working were doing things that looked straight off of the cover of a fantasy novel, but infinitely more powerful. And so the part of me that was attracted to science fiction and fantasy and kind of that really, how do I put it, kind of entry-level metaphysical work, was finding a lot of great Italian and Polish art in here. The other thing is that there are some artists, like a good example is like Kazimir Malevich is a great example. And he's kind of best known for doing things like painting like just a big black triangle. And one of the things is when you're looking through his work in books like this, and you're starting to see how deeply connected he was to mysticism, when he was doing things that were just flat black or things that were just apparently geometric, there's a depth to the work that this is kind of where we talk about the contextualization. If you don't know that he was on this mystical path where he was applying almost like a magus, trying to communicate things that he was bringing back from his mental, spiritual explorations, it's the difference between something just being a triangle and realizing that whatever year that was that he did that, 1901, 1903, what that was in contemporary art at that time was revolutionary, and where it was coming from. Like, one thing I never forgot is I remember how much I loved Gustave Moreau and how disdainful I was for the next generation of artists. And the thing that I learned is that the students of Moreau were, when you're looking at like Matisse and people like that, they were sitting there and they were looking at the ocean, and they'd already seen how do you get every tiny detail where you're almost looking at the molecules of it. And they had the idea, well, what if I just painted just blue out of the tube? Like, what does it feel like to behold the ocean? How do you capture that. And even things, the reason they painted a lot of things like bowls of fruit is they were looking at shapes and light, and they really were contemplating the human relationship to everyday objects. And you can think of that as being pedantic, but it was coming from a place that this was the generation after Moreau, and they'd already seen everything explored so fully that it wasn't like a Martha Stewart moment. There really was a really deep, almost like, reading Hebron's The Prophet or something. There was a kind of a mesmerism that these ordinary objects, whether it's an apple or the ocean, held, where they were trying to unlock, like, what is that magic of nature? And then from that, of course, we come to Art Nouveau, and then all of it just explodes all over the world. But so this is a book that helped me to understand who some of these artists were. There are names in here, that I had kind of, I don't want to say been maybe disdainful of, but even people like Gauguin and, you've got Kupka, who was a modernist. Like, how did he get into modernism? Well, you look at his early work and you kind of see the roots of that. So this is a book that was really, and again, there's different covers for it, but Taschen, Symbolism, whichever cover, they're all the same. I think the book is like $15 new. It's probably still in print. I didn't look, but it's a book that if I ever see it used, which I think has honestly only happened twice, I buy it to give it as a gift, because it's for everybody. I would also say, if you have anyone younger if you don't have this, you need to get it. If you have this, I would say, yeah, maybe go online, spend $10-15 and buy it for someone who that hasn't yet discovered the joy of the psychology of symbolist art. So then what happens after you've had a primer like that is you can start to get into individual artists. And the challenge that I have found there is that most of the artists that I love, there aren't books about. And then the other thing is, then the books that do exist often aren't very well done. And so when I saw that there was a book on Carlos Schwab, his painting, The Death of the Gravedigger. Of course, it's in the Louvre. It's one of the most wonderful of all symbolist art paintings. But when I saw that there was a book on him, I needed to get it. So the book is incredibly thorough, to the point where they've got illustrated pages in here. Lots of great reproductions of paintings. I'm gonna be he's so good. If you don't, I don't know, I'm kind of the wrong way for this, but if you don't know Schwab, I think the book is Infernal Creatures, where the end paper has this woman kind of looking down. Chandra's nodding yes, and there's serpents coming out of her nipples, and it's destruction after the Baudelaire poem. That's Carlos Schwab. That's Carlos Schwab at his best. And so the thing about this book is that some of the materials that they're working from, like, here's a great example, is that, this piece is in the Mucha book, and the one in our book, it looks night and day. The reproduction of this isn't as great. But it's here. And to have a book like this that's so thorough and has so many magnificent, just weird, spooky, freaky, weird, like, he was very involved in Christian mysticism. So you've got this thing here, but with these weird kind of, it reminds me of like some Jodorowsky comic book. I have no idea what that bookmark is. But this is a great book. And then I kind of have another funny relationship with this book. This book, I think it was $150 when I bought it. I don't know what they sell for now. That's what it was new. with monographs like this, a lot of times they're very expensive because they're produced in small quantities. It's probably cheaper at this point because you can probably find someone who's got a used copy or someone liquidating them. The book's probably 20 years old at this point. But what?
I mean, it's still $220 used.
Oh, really? Well, 220 was a good deal. 150 then. But it's worth it. It's worth it if you like his work because it has so much. Reproductions aren't great, but it's there. And then the other thing is, so we've had a lot of his work. We've had things in lots of different mediums, and we had a bunch of hand watercolored plates of his that we were selling, and I couldn't get anyone to look at them. And we still, 20 years later, 25 years later, still have a lot of them just because I pulled them off the market because they were too hard to sell for how great they were. But so I was thinking, I was looking in Bud Plant's catalog, his art book catalog, and he had this book for sale. And he said, if you love Barry Windsor Smith's Conan, you need this book. This was his biggest influence. And in that moment, that's when I thought, we need to be taking our Carlo Schwab artworks to where people know who Barry Windsor Smith is. Because our small things were like $1,800, and a Barry Windsor Smith Conan painting the same size would have been $15,000. And so sure enough, we went on the course, started doing Comic-Con, and the rest there is history. That's a long story for another day that I've told many times. You've probably all heard all of it. But that's what it was. It was that book, seeing it in the catalog and realizing that Comic-Con is where we were going to meet people that were interested in this kind of art. And sure enough, the one thing I will share is that I think our first two customers were Bud Plant and Charles Vess. And with Charles Vess, I did a trade. And with Bud Plant, with both of them, they were asking for really obscure things, not Carlo Schwab, but artists like that. And I think one of them was Heinrich Loeffler. And I think it was Charles Vess that said, you don't have Heinrich Loeffler by any chance? And I was like, I actually do. So that's book number 2, that if you want to do a deep dive into really esoteric stuff that's not published anywhere, where a vast majority of it isn't on the internet, but there's all kinds of crazy, weird claw flowers that would make great tattoos and lots of great stuff that would look like great rock posters. There's just a lot of inspiration in there. And that leads now to the third one. Those two are kind of the symbolist era. And then we get into kind of what my real relationship with art has as a foundation, which is the art poster. And this is another book that's had a lot of printings and a lot of different covers. This is an old printing. I know there's one that's blue that's got a woman flying through the air. It's a cycle poster. But the author is Max Gallo, Maxgallo. And this book is just filled with unbelievable artworks. And it is in this book that I learned there was far more to the world of poster art than Alphonse Mucha. And there's like, here's a great example. Like, you start to see the Italian poster art. And for me, posters like this one, it kind of became a shopping list for me in a lot of ways, that I was looking through and so, here, look at, I just saw The Woman in White, which is in our last book. There are so many things in here that aren't in other books, that this one really remains just a fantastic, look at this Italian Art Nouveau. I'm trying to work with the glare here. So painterly compared to the graphic material. This is the first place that I saw the Maison Moderne posters. And I'm trying to find, because this is where I first saw the Hohenstein match poster. The Italian stuff is so great. But there's a chapter on the early posters that I feel like most poster books skip right over, but I find incredibly interesting and very inspiring aesthetically. And then all of the stuff that gets into like the German. I'm going to try this way. Like look at that. Ooh, Peter Behrens. So it really does cover a really wide, it goes all the way through the 70s, really, really wide gamut. And I just can't recommend it highly enough. If you're interested in graphic design, if you're interested in poster art, if you're interested in illustration, and just socially, if you're interested in history, I am not going to find this match poster. Maybe it wasn't this book. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But it's an outstanding book. This is one that they've printed so many times. It's going to be like the Taschen one. I'm sure you'll be able to find this affordably. And much like that Taschen Symbolism, I would say if you have one poster book, honestly, even more than the ones that we've put out, that's the one that you want. It's a great gift if there's an artist that you're wanting to buy something for, or again, anyone interested in history, because he really does talk about the way advertising took form, or took shape as an art form is a better way to say it. There's illustrations in there of the kinds of kiosks that posters would be glued up on. And so, like, there was a time when I was working for a poster dealer to show flipping a table, and this other dealer who'd been around for 30 years wound up watching me. And after I was done, he came up, he said, "How much of that did you make up?" I was like, "How much did I make up?" "None of it." And he said, "I learned more from you in the last 20 minutes than I've learned in the last 20 years. And I said, "Well, I feel bad for your customers." And I thought, but he said, "Where did you learn all that?" I was like, I've read the books. Like, it's the information's out there. You just have to dig for it. And there's one that I didn't pull down that actually just made me think of this. Hold on. It's right here. What? The flowering, I forgot about this one, but this just, when you talk about, so the thing that we've done a lot is we try to get narrow on things. And one of the best first narrow books is this book by Julia King called The Flowering of Art Nouveau Graphics. This is another one. If you love Art Nouveau, you have to have this book. She breaks it down country by country. And again, you start to see Franz von Stuck, Belgium. Everyone knows this poster, but did you understand what was happening in Belgium at the time that was different than France? And whether you do or don't, you'll love this book because there's great, rare artworks in there. England, America, Spain, Russia, Austria, Germany, the Netherlands. Of course, I mean, the Dutch posters were great. Gets a little thin on some of the countries with the imagery. I think one of the reasons that our books are so image heavy is just because I really do feel like, that's important with graphics. But yeah, this is another huge home run book. Probably not very expensive online. I don't know how many times it was printed, but it was $30 new when I bought it. It's American publisher, 1990. Wow, it's a long time ago. But yeah, so that was a sidebar. That's a good one. I'm actually going to run out of time here because I'm going to run out of books, I mean. So getting into kind of these other niche, something that I found myself remembering when I worked on we just finished, well, there's two things I could say. One is that the reason that we're doing a new book series in another week or two is when we're going to launch the Kickstarter, but we're doing one just on German Art Nouveau. And one of the reasons is books like that one that I just showed you. And it's really fascinating to me that every country so deeply has its own flavor of Art Nouveau. And it's kind of like saying rock and roll. The disparity between Spanish Art Nouveau and American and Italian for sure in one direction and then Austrian the other, all they're almost like all different petals of a flower. And France and Belgium, those petals are next to each other. And Germany is probably on the other side of Belgium and then moves towards American with arts and crafts. But I'm really particularly fond of the German Art Nouveau. It is a palette that very much inspired the psychedelic rock posters. All of those artists were very familiar specifically with the German art because of an exhibition that took place at Berkeley in the 60s. You keep leaning over. Are you trying to get my attention? Oh, I can't really see that thing from here. Do you want to read me one? Before I talk about divinely elegant.
Chatzar suggests you should offer an online art history course.
Sounds like a lot of work, chat. But thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's the cool thing about these books, though, is that the ones that I'm trying to pick, there's some that get really academic, and I will read an entire thick book, and maybe there's 4 or 5 lines that I can kind of regurgitate into something a little easier to digest. But the poster in history, the Taschen Symbolism book, and the Julia King book, those are all they're really easy to get into. So those are a really great start. If anybody likes that idea and wants a course type setting, those are 3 really good starter ones. And then getting into another kind of channel, this is a book called Divinely Elegant. And this is, it's a complicated story. So this artist named Ernst Deutsch was one of the foremost illustrators during the silent film era, the early silent film. He did some Austin Nielsen posters. He, after around 1910, very, very famous fashion illustrator. And he wound up going away to fight in the war. And from an illustration point of view, it would be like, I mean, he was pop culture popular in a huge way. So it would be like Shepard Fairey or someone. Like his hand was ubiquitous in the art world in Germany prior to World War I. So he went away to war and he came back, and just in that period of time, you had the Weimar Republic, you had Expressionism taking hold, things were happening. And because all of this new blood had come into the art industry, he basically got told that he was too old and too outdated. And so Ernst Deutsch disappeared, and the art agencies started getting submissions from an artist named Ernst Dryden, Dryden, who it's the same style, just a little bit sleeker, and he, much like Frank Sinatra, having multiple careers, completely reinvented himself and climbed back to the top of the food chain again. And the idea that they told him, go home, you're too old, and he just changed his name and then literally rebuilt himself up. It's kind of like, Alexander the Great giving away everything and then traveling the world to rebuild his kingdom. I love that story. I love that he kind of thumbed his nose at being told he was done. And then, as if that wasn't enough, then the third section of his art career is he moved to America, to California, and was discovered by Marlene Dietrich, who fell in love with his designs. And he'd been a fashion illustrator in Germany. So then he starts designing for Marlene Dietrich. And so this book is, I mean, there's some good artwork in here. It's definitely not like the Symbolist book. It's not filled with things that I think most of us maybe are looking at for the audience for our books. There's a lot of fashion kind of things, but the photographs from the period, it's a little more e-cart. It's a little, I mean, his early silent film stuff is great. Like, I'm more of a fan of his early silent film stuff, but I just love his story so much. And this is one of those weird things. Billy Wilder wrote the foreword. That's that's cool. Director of Some Like It Hot. It was published in 1989, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody mention Ernst Deutsch or Ernst Drieden again. So I have a lot of his posters. I've put him in multiple books, and I've mentioned this book multiple times, and I quoted some things in this in the expanded hardcover edition of Beautiful Macabre that is going to be coming out this fall. And it just made me think of it today when I was thinking about inspirational books, that it's just a great story. It's just a great story. And if you're kind of more like me and, you like graphic novels because there's a lot of pictures, what's great is you're getting this cool history story. And then you're looking through photographs of these great 1930s automobiles and great fashion illustrations. And it just kind of helps paint the picture a little bit for me. So I really enjoy that. And that's just a huge sleeper pick. It's called Divinely Elegant by Anthony Lipman, Lipmann. That's got to be cheap. I don't know. Chandra, maybe look, but it's got to be maybe 20, 30 bucks. But a great, great, great book. This one probably, I would say that the Symbolism book, super, super high point. The poster and history book, super, super high point. And then I would say the last book that I have pulled here is for me personally, probably like the high point. This is the later printing. I pulled this one just so you could see this cover. Also, the other one has nudity. But Voluptuous Panic by Mel Gordon, who is sadly no longer with us, published by the brilliant publisher Feral House, run by Mel Gordon, who is also sadly no longer with us. This book is probably the most inspirational for me. Not just because it so thoroughly and deeply takes you into the world, not just of the art that was hanging in a gallery, not just the work hanging on the streets, but into the nightclubs, into the music, into the culture, into the human relationship to art during the Weimar era. And if you're not familiar with that, I use that term all the time. The Weimar era is basically the time in between the two world wars. It's after the First World War. It was the temporary government was based in Weimar. And it was when the black market was rampant and the Deutschmark had plummeted. And this was the government that was formed in the interim before the Nazis took power. So like if you've watched the movie Cabaret, that is like the Weimar Republic movie, that period where these things were creeping up. And so this book is also, I gotta find one I can hold that doesn't have excessive nudity, but it's not a book for the faint of heart. It's tons and tons of visuals. But even more importantly, really, how do I put it? I'm going to say vernacular I mean, it's hard finding spreads I can hold up here. But really vernacular storytelling. And what I mean by that is the reason that I think this book was probably my biggest influence as a writer and a publisher. I mean, as a writer, it might be the disinformation books because of Richard Metzger's style. But in terms of the way I present things and put things together, this book illustrated to me that nearly every book ever, like if I look at all of these books behind me here, 99.9% of them don't have an intimate relationship with what they're talking about. And what I mean by that is it's almost like, you know, when people go on stage and then they put on their fake voice. And even when Chandra knew that this microphone was going to pick her up, she put on a different voice, which is like her awkward voice. But everybody does it. Everybody has like, who am I in my intimate moments? And who am I when I think someone else is watching or listening? And when we talk about art, I feel like the thing that I see everybody try to do, and most people succeed brilliantly, is they really want to sound smart. And you want that. When someone's writing a book, you want them to sound smart. You want them to know what they're talking about. And think about music for a minute. And think about when you really understand music and you listen to a rock song. You know, these are all over YouTube. You listen to something and someone's telling you, well, they use an inverted chord here and they do this. And all of that is incredibly valuable. And then now think about like your favorite song. You probably did not hear that song and say, oh man, I love minor ninth chords. You probably had something else that you reacted to. It was something in the lyric. It was something in the melody. It was a life situation where you heard that and it either inspired you or supported you at a different time. And so to me, that reminder is, and this is something that comes into all my work, which is like the rhetoric is magnificent, but it's just the tiniest fraction of peeking behind the curtain of what art is, whether it's music, whether it's cinema, whether it's painting, whether it's anything. And so the thing that, I mean, how is this for a sales pitch for Voluptuous Panic? So the thing about Mel Gordon, what he inspired in me as an author, is that he so thoroughly explored the world, the underworld of Weimar Berlin. What were the slang terms for the different kind of sex workers? What were the, you know, what did the sign above the Top Keller salon read? I'm not going to tell you. You have to read the book. That was a lesbian club in Germany in 1922. All of these little details, when you then look at a Jean Mammon painting, or you look at an Otto Dix painting, or any of those things, they contextualize it in a way that really makes you understand the freneticism of line in some of this work. Why is the sensuality from 1890 so different than the sensuality from 1920? Like, why? Why is it so different from 1910 to 1930? And I think when people talk about it, I think it's Elvis Costello who said, talking about music is like dancing about architecture. And so the thing that I feel really fails with art books is that you're trying to put language to something that transcends language. Well, now we're getting back to why I love symbolism. So something that transcends language, but then also if you don't write these books, you're not helping people get a leg up on understanding. I can't tell you. I remember one time there was this woman who had a booth across from us at a show. It was a design show. And she was so elegant, so sophisticated, so smart. I was just really impressed with her. And there was an artwork that we had it was actually a Gail Pataki piece. And I was just curious, for someone that this wasn't their style, like she was very into modernism, like what would they see? And I remember asking her, hey, can I ask you a question? What do you see when you look at this? And she kind of like, gave me a couple lines or whatever. And then we became close. And later she said, I got to tell you, when you asked me that question, I never felt so stupid in my entire life. I was like, what do you mean? She felt so unqualified to have an opinion and thought that I was going to think she was dumb and was just kind of hedging her statement. And I thought, like, that is the point I'm trying to get to, is just that there's something liberating about not caring what people think. And so when you're dancing in your bedroom and you're listening to music, you're not thinking about the chord structures. When you're looking at a painting and it's making you feel something, you're not using that voice of being observed. And so whether it's expressionism or whether it's symbolism, or if it's Gustave Moreau or Toulouse-Lautrec or anything, kind of, if you pull the taffy of this half century apart, there's so many different lines in there that one of the reasons that I read books like one I've talked about on Patreon is Vagabonding Throughout Germany. And it's just these two guys that are backpacking after the First World War through Germany, kind of journaling about what they're seeing in these small towns. And today that would be like Jordan Klepper with The Daily Show or something, going to some southern state during a Klan rally or whatever. It's looking at things that are outside of the expected. And what happens so much with academic books is it's that tale of who writes the history books. It's the victors. So the problem with most of these books on the wall, maybe not here, but in a normal library, is that it's kind of the same reconstituted information. And the thing about Voluptuous Panic, to return it here and to kind of explain why this inspires me, is that there's so much information in here that's first or second hand, meaning he's getting it from someone who witnessed it firsthand. He's interviewed people who were part of these scenarios and movements, or he's finding himself the old pamphlets or photos of a venue or things like that. And so that's just something that's always really, really inspired me. So if you are not afraid of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, this is it's definitely an NC-17 book, but it's fantastic. It's fantastic. Obviously, I just rambled. I would say I can't say enough nice things about it. I introduced him once. He had a book called Horizontal Collaboration, which was about spies in France, I think in the 30s. And I introduced him. It was certainly not nearly that long, but afterwards he said, I don't think I've ever had such a flattering introduction in my entire life. So I was very happy that I got to meet him and tell him how much his work meant to me. He did a really nice thing. He sent me, and I'm mortified that I lost it because it was so long ago. It's like 14 computers ago. But he'd sent me his bibliography. He doesn't use bibliographies in his book. He said he personally felt like it was distracting, and so much of it's interviews and things like that. But he sent me his bibliography, and I used that as a shopping list. And so there's an entire wall section over there that's literally just all the crime journals and the police blotters and, an extraordinary number of books on spanking published in Germany in the 20s. But yeah, that was all Mel Gordon. And so I'm really grateful that he was so kind to me, and even more so that he wrote that book. And you'll see it a lot, especially I think I'm really, really feeling this because of what I just did with the expanded version of Beautiful Macabre. So it took a long time because I was so distracted with working on Caligula, and everyone's patience with me there. Like I got Caligula into the Cannes Film Festival. I feel like it was worth my time to do that, but I felt like, okay, part of it is I just knew I could make Beautiful Macabre better. And part of it is in a really small way leaning towards that inspiration. On a scale from 1 to 10, I only hit 2 out of 10 compared to what he did in terms of coverage. But the thing that I did do is there's a ton of information in there. There are posters that had been listed in books as anonymous that I found who the artist was. Things where people said this poster is about this, and I found out it wasn't because I was able to find old brochures and things like that. So there's a lot of, that kind of fascination and research I've always had. But Voluptuous Panic not only fueled my validation that if you do it, it makes a great book, but also that thing of me like kind of always wondering, yeah, but what was like the normal person on the street thinking? Like, not what did the Billboard chart say, but what were people listening to in a bar, or what were people listening to in different parts of a country or whatever. So that's my long Mel Gordon story. And I can't really see any comment stuff here, but I'll go in here for, oh wait, I can actually. Here we go. Oh my gosh, Chetsar, man, I appreciate you so much. The technology for reproduction has improved, which makes it so much more frustrating to me when people don't utilize it. Taschen books are kind of an example of that. Like they don't really aim for the highest quality. But it's very, I see it very little with art books nowadays. That's a whole other thing. I got to find a positive spin. The positive spin is that I'm furiously militant about it. Like with Le Pater, we had people in museums rephotographing things. You'll never see me use a low resolution image because I'll find if I don't have it or haven't physically had my hands on it, I'll find a person who does and get them to let me photograph or scan it, just to make sure that it's great. And, there's some times where we, like, especially with Muka, where we pulled things from other sources, and like one big one is there's a book called Art Nouveau Bing, which is, it's another great book. And it's actually right here. This is another really super fascinating book. If you thought Art Nouveau was just a style, you are mistaken. But look at here. This photo is in the Le Pater book, but we contacted the museum that had the original metal plate photo or glass slide, whatever it was. And so there's photographs that I had seen in here of what the inside of the salon looked like. And all you got to do if you're publishing a book is contact the museum. Here it is. So like these photos, which I'd always seen, I'd always held magnifying glasses up, wanting to know what's in these cases. Well, in our Muka book, this photo is a immaculately printed, 16 by 24 inch spread. I mean, it's blown up so big that you can identify the vases and the wallpaper maker, all of that stuff. So yes, the technology has vastly improved. I don't feel like people use it as much as I wish they would personally. But I don't want to it's very easy to nudge me into curmudgeonness, and I've avoided it in a very major way for a couple decades now. So I don't want to go back there. Let's see. Good for JKS3. Fashion. What is JKS3? I believe you meant Adam Parfrey, who ran Feral House. Did I say Mel Gordon ran it?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Mel Gordon was an author. Adam Parfrey ran Feral House, and he is also passed. Mel Gordon wrote a few books for him. I would say the best one by far is Voluptuous Panic. Once you've bought into that, the others work as satellites. There's a book he did on Anita Berber, the 7 Professions and 5 Addictions, or 7 Addictions and 5, something of Anita Berber, which is great. And I remember telling Adam how much I loved the book. And he said, really? I was disappointed with it. And I said, why? He's like, well, just after Voluptuous Panic, I thought he was going to turn in like a really dense thing. And that's kind of the best way to describe Mel's other work, is that it's kind of like the way I did Le Pater, and it's super dense. But then we do these other poster books that are really light, and they're great to read, and they're meant to be kind of fun and quick. And so the Anita Berber book that he did is a pretty quick read. Same thing with, he did a book on the Grand Guignol Theater. It's a really quick read. But they're magnificent. And Feral House is also another publisher that Adam's taste was just extraordinary. If you look at feralhouse.com, his sister is still running it, and anything you order that's a Feral House book, I cannot imagine you being disappointed. And they're really disparate subjects, but they're all just a little left of center, a little freaky and a little weird. Like there's a great book on Hollywood's Hellfire Club. So kind of like Hollywood Babylon kind of stuff. But so that was our look through the library. We have 5 minutes left. Should I pick a book at random? What's a good... Do
you think Century Guild will ever do a Grand Guignol?
Well, what an interesting question, Chandra. Yes, we are doing a Grand Guignol book. I don't want to say when, though. But soon. For us, I'm going to say very soon. The next thing we're doing is Jugendstil. We're going to do a series like the Orchid Garden books that really get into German Art Nouveau illustration. But the next big book that I want to do is actually Ilse, the Mucha book. Yes. But one of the things when you're doing a book like Le Pater is you kind of reach a point where, like in that case, I'd collected for decades. And you always think, I'm going to find one more thing. I'm going to find one more thing. And with the Grand Guignol book, that was kind of happening, is that like every time I would think maybe I've got enough, I would find a poster. The later posters are kind of a little like smaller, billboardy, 20s, 30s. They're not as great. Some of the earlier ones are really sexy, sensual, really dark, really cool. And every time I would think I had enough, like something else would pop up that was a poster that wasn't in any museums, wasn't in any of the historical records. And then I would get that poster. And then I would think, well, maybe now we're done. But it's reached a point where so many museums have put their archives together in a way that's searchable. And I've met other collectors. And then the other thing too is just I've been buying that material really religiously for 20 years at this point. And so it's kind of like there has to be a little bit of a line in the sand of like, do I never do it? And And also, too, doing Beautiful Macabre kind of let some of the air out of that balloon. One of the things I was having a hard time with is there were so many things that fit the Grand Guignol aesthetic, but I couldn't figure out how to work it together. And so what I did with this expanded Beautiful Macabre edition is a lot of the posters I'd been coveting for a Grand Guignol book, I put into that book because maybe they're more merchandise related or like a technology related or something. And so I thought they don't really apply. And so I let them go. And so I feel like I've got a better focus for Grand Guignol now. So anyway, that's how my brain works. But so I kind of grabbed this. This is just an interesting thing. This may be hard to find. Robert Pincus Witten, a magnificent author. Is he? I can't believe I'm going to draw a lapse on this. Did he write that Symbolism? What is it that he drew that or wrote? Who wrote Dreamers of Decadence? Philippe Julian. Okay, so anyway, Pincus Witten wrote something that was related, one of these Art Nouveau or Symbolism books that was just outstanding. This is a weird book that probably no one will suggest. Occult Symbolism in France. How is this for an exciting cover? It's not. But what happened is he gave a dissertation on French occult symbolism in 1968. And he self-published his dissertation in 1976. And so if you can find a copy, they do turn up. I'm certain they're going to be over $100, but it's worth, I'm not even going to try to put that on. That's kind of like our little bonus one, I guess. Yeah, if you're interested in really crazy, like I quoted, this was a huge help with the Le Pater book. Things like the descriptions of the guy wearing the velvet gloves at the Salon Rosequois. I got that from him sourcing the periodical from 1892. And then the other thing I do with these is when I'm reading these and someone tells you where they get their information, I always look for those. I look for those magazines. I look for the newspapers. I look for the books. And sometimes when you get something like this, where it's a, what is it? I say 1968 dissertation, the books that he's referencing are often 1896, 1892, 1903, things that kind of 1921. Books that kind of get a little bit lost to history because they're so long out of print. And unless you scour old library book sales and stuff like that, you might never have come across. But a lot of those old books have really early first or secondhand information that over the years, through the game of telephone, either gets distorted or just ignored altogether. So that was our, what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 books. It's a lucky number. Oh, we hit 7. All right. Chet. I don't know if I have your dystopia book. I think I do. Yeah, and now in my head, I'm trying to remember. I know I've seen it. I do believe I have it. I'm almost positive I have it. I would love to come on the podcast again, Chet. I'd love to just talk to you. I'd love to talk to you just in person. I haven't seen you. And if anyone is not following Chet Czar's podcast, you need to correct that. He's brilliant. Kaz Marius, after the last salon, I went to my local library and managed to get a hold of a copy of Dreamers of Decadence via interlibrary loan. If it's hard to find, that can be a good avenue to find one. You know, it's so funny. I have a really bizarre relationship with libraries. My entire world would not be what it was if it wasn't for Mrs. Kearns in the 6th grade and Alan Zebarth in that same era of my life. I would not have discovered Michael Moorcock if it wasn't for Alan. He was the local librarian and this teacher. So my school library, I would check out the same 2 books over and over again. And the librarian kind of confronted me like, you're not reading. You're not reading. And mortified, I kind of said, well, like, there's only 2 books in here I want to read. Because it's like, I don't know, what kind of books are in a grammar school library at a Catholic school? There were 2 books on Greek mythology and Norse mythology. And I just kept rotating those 2 over and over. Because if nothing else, maybe I'd pick something else up. But then I would go to my real library, and then this guy Alan would just be piling these books on me. It's like A Stainless Steel Rat is Born was his recommendation. I definitely Michael Moorcock and all of that weird 60s comics like the Dark Shadows comics. I remember he bought for me from a comic book show. And oh my God, who wrote, I'm drawing a blank on some of these writers, but there's all these science fiction writers. Harlan Ellison, he turned me on to Harlan Ellison. Isaac Asimov. Well, so actually Isaac Asimov was not him. Isaac Asimov was this school teacher that once this teacher at school learned that I was not checking books out of the library, she started going to her library and checking books out for me. And that's how I read iRobot, because she went to her library, checked out iRobot, handed it to me in line, and was just supported the fact that I loved to read, but didn't find anything interesting in their library. But she kept doing that for me, and that was really wonderful. But the reason I don't go to libraries anymore is that I paid so much in overdue fees in my lifetime that I could have bought the books multiple times over, because I like stacking books and reading part of one and maybe moving to another. And I would see 10 things that I wanted to read, and I'd have the stack of 10, and maybe I'd read one. And I can't return it because I got to read the second. And then I'd get 6 down, and it would be a month later, and I wouldn't have returned the first one. So that is really why I buy so many books now, is because I remember in my years before 6th grade when this was happening, I just remember the librarian there taking pity on me and just charging me like a flat $2 for a book that I'd had out for, I don't know, 9 months or something like that. And it was an Edgar Rice Burroughs book. I remember that. And to answer the question on this dissertation, the author of Occult Symbolism in France is Robert Pincus Witten. Chandra can put this in the comments or the description. Pincus Witten is Pincus-Witten. And he's written other things. My head's a little addled right now, but I knew his name. And so I knew that when he had done this book, and it was a weird, super expensive book when I first found it, and then I got it, and it was like, oh, he self-published it, and it's just like Xeroxes of his typed dissertation with terrible reproductions in the back, but the information's beautiful. I love it, and I learned a lot from it. Occult Symbolism in France, 1968, published in, I think, 76, did I say? Yeah, Robert Pincus Witten, from a small press. I mean, he's the copyright holder, a small press in New York or London or something, I don't remember. I could look. Actually, you know what? I was going to say, but I've kept you long, but I've kept you this long. Print in the United States of America. Garland Publishing, 1976. I've never seen it published again. So any edition you find is probably going to be a little expensive because I think it's just that 1976 printing. I was about to start a ramble again, but I noticed that it's 9:07 and Chandra's giving me the high sign. She's about to pull the power on the lights. Thank you guys for being here. Like I said at the start, I try to do these every month just kind of as a sign of gratitude for the people who buy our books, for the people who used to come to the gallery. It's just kind of a way to remain present. If there's anything you want us to talk about, you can definitely comment on the video and we'll see that and integrate that. And my brain is already thinking about some stuff we're talking about for the next salon. But so thank you for being here. And I guess we'll talk soon. We'll see.